My son excluded me from my grandson's birth. My wife only wants close family there. After 3 years of being ignored, I won the lottery. Then he invited me to finally meet my grandson. What I did left him pale. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that the most joyful day in my family would become the most devastating moment of my 70 years on this earth. It was a Tuesday morning when my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door, her face beaming with excitement. "Joyce-Ann, I just saw Joshua at the grocery store." Congratulations on becoming a grandmother. The words hit me like ice water. I stood there in my doorway, still in my robe, trying to process what she'd just said. "What do you mean?" Her smile faltered when she saw my confusion. "The baby? Little Anthony was born yesterday, wasn't he?" Joshua seemed so happy, buying cigars and everything. My grandson had been born 24 hours ago, and nobody had told me. I managed to thank Mrs. Patterson and close the door before my legs gave out. I slumped against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. How was this possible? How could my only son, my Joshua, not call his own mother when his child was born? With shaking hands, I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. On the third attempt, someone finally answered. "Hello, Mrs. Klein." It was Stella, my daughter-in-law, her voice cold and formal as always. "Stella, honey, I just heard about the baby. Why didn't anyone call me? Is everyone okay? I need to come to the hospital right away." There was a long pause. I could hear muffled voices in the background, and what sounded like Joshua saying something, though I couldn't make out the words. "Actually, Mrs. Klein, we've decided to keep things small, just immediate family for now. You understand?" Immediate family. The words felt like a slap. But I am immediate family. I'm his grandmother. Joshua's sleeping right now, and I really think it's best if we have some space to bond as our own little family first. Maybe in a few weeks. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling. In 42 years of being Joshua's mother, through his childhood illnesses, his teenage rebellion, his college years, his wedding planning, I had never been excluded from anything. Not once. But now, when my first grandchild entered the world, I was being shut out. I drove to the hospital anyway. I couldn't help myself. St. Mary's Hospital was only 15 minutes away, and I knew the maternity ward well from visiting other friends over the years. I parked in the visitor lot, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and dread. At the information desk, a young volunteer with a bright smile asked how she could help. "I'm here to see my new grandson, Anthony Klein. My son is Joshua Klein." She typed something into her computer, then frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, but it looks like the family has requested no visitors except those on an approved list. But I'm the grandmother. Surely there's been a mistake. Let me call up to the room for you." I waited, fidgeting with my purse strap, watching other families walk by with balloons and flowers, heading to meet their new family members. The volunteer hung up the phone and gave me a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Klein. They've confirmed that you're not on the visitor list." Not on the visitor list, my own grandson, and I wasn't on the visitor list. I found myself in the hospital parking lot, sitting in my car, sobbing like I hadn't since my husband died 8 years ago. The pain was physical, a sharp ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. People walked past my car, heading into the hospital with gifts and smiles, and I wondered how many of them were meeting their grandchildren for the first time. How many of them were experiencing the pure joy that had been stolen from me. I called Joshua's number again and again, but it kept going to voicemail. Finally, I left a message, my voice barely steady. "Joshua, it's your mother. I know Anthony is here, and I just want to meet my grandson. Please call me back. I love you." He never called back that day, or the next, or the day after that. 3 days later, I finally received a text message. "Mom, we need some time to adjust. Stella is having a hard time, and we want to bond as a family first. We'll call you soon." Soon. Such a small word that would haunt me for the next 3 years. That night, I sat in the nursery I had prepared in my spare bedroom. I'd spent weeks decorating it, choosing the perfect crib, hanging little star decals on the ceiling, organizing tiny clothes I'd bought in anticipation of babysitting my grandchild. Now it felt like a tomb. I looked at the framed photo on the dresser, Joshua as a baby, sleeping peacefully in my arms. I had been so young then, just 28, and so completely in love with this tiny person who had made me a mother. Now, at 70, I was being told I couldn't be a grandmother. The cruelest part wasn't just the exclusion. It was the realization that my son had chosen this. He had stood by and let his wife ban me from the most important moment of our family's life. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. 3 years, 36 months, 1,095 days of being erased from my grandson's life. The math became an obsession. I found myself calculating how many bedtime stories I'd missed, how many first words, first steps, first everything. Anthony would be walking now, probably talking, maybe even asking questions about the world around him, and he had no idea I existed. The first year, I tried everything. I sent birthday cards that came back marked "Return to Sender." I bought Christmas presents that sat unopened in my closet because I had nowhere to deliver them. I drove past their house sometimes, hoping for a glimpse of my grandson playing in the yard, but their windows were always closed, their lives hidden from me. I attended every public event I thought they might be at: the annual summer festival, the farmer's market, even Joshua's company picnic where I pretended to be shopping at nearby stores, scanning the crowds for a familiar face. But they seemed to have vanished from all the places we used to cross paths. The worst part was how methodical it all felt. This wasn't just distance or busy schedules. This was deliberate erasure. When Anthony turned 1, I spent the entire day crying. I'd bought him a musical teddy bear that played "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," and I held it close, imagining his little hands reaching for it, his eyes lighting up at the melody. Instead, it joined the growing collection of unwrapped gifts in what used to be his nursery. My friends tried to help, but their well-meaning advice only made things worse. "Have you tried talking to a lawyer?" Margaret suggested over coffee. "Maybe you have grandparents' rights." But I couldn't bring myself to take legal action against my own son. The thought of standing in a courtroom, fighting for court-ordered visitation with my own grandchild, felt like admitting that our family was truly broken beyond repair. By the second year, the hope began to fade. I stopped checking my phone constantly for messages that never came. I stopped driving past their house. I even started boxing up the nursery, though I couldn't bring myself to actually donate the items. The isolation was suffocating. Joshua had been my only child, my only family after my husband passed. His rejection meant complete solitude during holidays, birthdays, and all the small moments when you want to share life with someone who loves you. I found myself talking to Anthony's photo, the one newborn picture that Mrs. Patterson had shown me from her phone after seeing it on Joshua's social media. I'd asked her to print it for me, and she'd obliged, though I could see the pity in her eyes. "Happy second birthday, sweetheart," I whispered to the photo last October. "Grandma loves you so much. I hope you're having the most wonderful day." The hardest moments came unexpectedly. Seeing other grandmothers at the grocery store with their grandchildren, watching families at the park, commercial jingles about family gatherings during the holidays. Each reminder was a fresh wound. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, because the loneliness was becoming unbearable. She helped me understand that this wasn't about something I'd done wrong. This was about control and manipulation, about someone who saw me as a threat to their perfect family picture. "Stella views you as competition," Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. "Some people need to be the center of attention, and they see extended family as obstacles to that control. But understanding it didn't make it hurt less." The third year brought a different kind of pain, acceptance mixed with resignation. I stopped expecting phone calls. I stopped hoping that Joshua would come to his senses and realize what he was doing to our family. I started living for myself again, something I hadn't done since becoming a mother at 28. I took up watercolor painting, joined a book club, even planned a solo trip to Ireland that I'd been postponing for years. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the loneliness crept in, I still wondered about Anthony. Was he a happy child? Did he look like Joshua did at that age? Did he ever ask about grandparents? Most painfully, I wondered if Stella had convinced them that I was dead. It would be easier to explain my complete absence that way than to admit they'd chosen to cut me out. The day everything changed started like any other Wednesday. I was tending to my small garden, trying to coax my tomatoes into ripening before the first frost, when my neighbor Mr. Rodriguez knocked on my fence. "Joyce Ann, you need to check your numbers," he called out, waving a newspaper in the air. "What numbers?" I asked, wiping dirt from my hands. "The lottery. Last night's drawing. I think you might have won something big." I'd been buying the same lottery numbers for 15 years, a combination of family birthdays, including Anthony's, even though I'd never met him. It was a silly tradition that connected me to the family I'd lost, a weekly ritual that cost $2 and bought me a few minutes of dreaming about better times. I fumbled for the ticket in my kitchen drawer, my hands shaking as I compared the numbers to the newspaper Mr. Rodriguez had brought over. All 6 numbers matched. $2.8 million. I stared at the ticket, then at the newspaper, then back at the ticket. This couldn't be real. After 3 years of loss and isolation, after feeling like the universe had forgotten about me entirely, I had won more money than I'd ever imagined having. For the first time in 3 years, I smiled a real, genuine smile. And then my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately, though I hadn't seen it in over 1,000 days. Joshua. The phone rang 3 times before I found the courage to answer. 3 years of silence, and now Joshua was calling within hours of the lottery announcement hitting the local news. "Mom?" His voice sounded exactly the same, and for a moment, I was transported back to when he was 8 years old, calling me from school because he'd forgotten his lunch money. Joshua. I couldn't manage more than his name. My throat felt tight, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mom, we heard about your lottery win. Congratulations. That's incredible news." Of course Stella was listening, probably coaching him on what to say. "Thank you," I managed, gripping the kitchen counter for support. "Listen, Mom, I know it's been a while since we talked, and I feel terrible about that. Really terrible. Stella and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you to meet Anthony properly. You know, as his grandmother." The words I'd dreamed of hearing for 3 years, delivered with all the sincerity of a used car salesman. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar sting behind my eyelids. "Have you now?" I kept my voice carefully neutral. "Yes, and Mom, Anthony asks about you all the time. He really wants to meet his grandma. We've told him so many wonderful stories about you." The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. Anthony was 3 years old. If he'd been asking about me all the time, why had they waited until today to call? Why hadn't they called yesterday or last week, or any time in the past 195 days? "That's interesting, Joshua. What kind of stories?" There was a pause, and I could hear muffled whispering in the background. "Oh, you know, about how loving you are. How you used to make those amazing chocolate chip cookies when I was little. Anthony would love to try those cookies, Mom. My chocolate chip cookies. The recipe I'd perfected over years of trial and error. The same cookies Joshua used to beg me to pack extra of in his school lunches so he could share with friends. The cookies I'd imagined making for Anthony countless times over the past 3 years. I see. And when did you have in mind for this meeting? Well, actually, we were thinking maybe this weekend, Saturday afternoon. We could come by your place, bring Anthony over, make it really special, you know, this weekend. 4 days after my lottery numbers were announced in the paper, 3 years and 4 days since they'd decided I wasn't immediate family. That sounds lovely, Joshua. I surprised myself with how calm I sounded. I'll make sure to have those cookies ready. Mom, that's fantastic. Anthony is going to be so excited. We're all excited. It's going to be like a real family reunion. A real family reunion. As if the past 3 years had been some kind of vacation from being related. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the winning lottery ticket still spread on my counter. The numbers blurred through my tears, but this time they weren't tears of joy or grief. They were tears of clarity. I'd spent 3 years wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a mother, why my son had chosen to exclude me from his life. I'd second-guessed every conversation we'd ever had, replayed every moment of his childhood, searching for the crack where I'd lost him. But this phone call had answered all my questions. I hadn't lost Joshua 3 years ago. I'd never really had him at all, at least not the version of him that existed now. The Joshua I'd raised, the one who used to call me every Sunday just to chat, who remembered my birthday without prompting, who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because I'd mentioned feeling lonely, that Joshua had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, or maybe this was who he'd always been, and Stella had just given him permission to show it. I called Dr. Martinez and scheduled an emergency session. "How do you feel about seeing them again?" she asked after I'd explained the situation. "Angry," I admitted, "but also curious. I want to see what kind of performance they'll put on. I want to meet my grandson, even if it's under these circumstances." "And what are you planning to do about the money?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. When I'd first seen those matching numbers, my immediate impulse had been to plan a generous future for Anthony. College funds, family vacations, a beautiful home where he could visit his grandmother whenever he wanted. But that was before Joshua's phone call, before the transparent desperation in his voice, before the obvious coaching from Stella in the background. "I'm not sure yet," I told Dr. Martinez. "But I know one thing. I'm not going to be anyone's ATM, not even my son's." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I baked chocolate chip cookies, the familiar rhythm of measuring flour, creaming butter and sugar, folding in the chocolate chips. It all felt like muscle memory. As the first batch baked, filling my kitchen with the scent of my childhood, my grandmother's recipe, Joshua's favorite treat, I made a decision. I was going to give them exactly what they deserved. The cookies came out perfect. Golden brown with slightly soft centers, just the way Joshua had always liked them. I packed them in the same blue tin I'd used for his school lunches, the one with tiny dents from years of use. Then I sat down and made a phone call to my financial advisor. "Margaret, it's Joyce and Klein. I need to discuss some options for my lottery winnings. Specifically, I want to know about charitable donations and how quickly they can be processed." By Friday night, everything was arranged. The cookies were ready, the house was spotless, and my plan was set. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that belonged in a greeting card. Golden leaves drifted across my front yard, and the air held that crisp promise of winter that used to make me excited for holiday gatherings. I was ready an hour early, sitting by my front window with the blue tin of cookies on my lap, watching for Joshua's car. When the silver SUV finally pulled into my driveway, my heart stopped. There, in a car seat in the back, was Anthony. Even from a distance, I could see he had Joshua's dark hair and what looked like his father's stubborn chin. He was bigger than I'd imagined, no longer the baby I'd been picturing for 3 years. He was a little boy now, a child with opinions and personality, and 3 whole years of life I'd missed. Joshua got out first, looking exactly the same except for new lines around his eyes. He was 31 now, though the stress of whatever they'd been dealing with seemed to have aged him. Behind him, Stella emerged from the passenger side, and I was shocked by how different she looked. The Stella I remembered from their wedding 7 years ago had been pretty in an understated way, with soft brown hair and a genuine smile. This Stella had been transformed into someone else entirely. Her hair was now platinum blonde, expensively styled, and she wore what was clearly a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But it was her expression that caught my attention. She was surveying my modest house with barely concealed disappointment, as if she'd expected to pull up to a mansion. I opened my door before they could knock, forcing a warm smile. "Joshua!" I exclaimed, opening my arms. He hesitated for just a moment, long enough for me to notice, before stepping into the hug. He felt thinner than I remembered, and he smelled like expensive cologne instead of the Old Spice he'd worn since high school. "Hi, Mom! You look great." His voice carried that same forced enthusiasm from our phone call. "Stella, honey." I turned to my daughter-in-law, who offered me a practiced smile and a brief, awkward hug. "Mrs. Klein, It's so wonderful to see you again. You look exactly the same." It was a polite lie. I knew I looked older. 3 years of grief and isolation had added new wrinkles, new gray streaks in my hair. But I appreciated the gesture. And then Joshua opened the back door of the SUV and lifted out Anthony. My grandson was beautiful, not just grandmother bias beautiful, but genuinely stunning, with Joshua's dark eyes and what looked like my late husband's nose. He was wearing a tiny button-down shirt and khaki pants, dressed like a miniature adult, and he clung to Joshua's shoulder with the kind of shyness that made my heart ache. "Anthony, this is Grandma Joyce-Ann," Joshua said softly. "Remember we told you about her?" Anthony peeked at me from behind Joshua's shoulder, his thumb firmly planted in his mouth despite being 3 years old. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered, fighting back tears. "I'm so happy to finally meet you." He didn't respond, just buried his face deeper into Joshua's neck. "He's a little shy at first," Stella explained, though her tone suggested this was somehow my fault. "He'll warm up once he gets to know you." Gets to know me, as if I were a stranger they'd just met, instead of the grandmother who'd been deliberately kept away from him for his entire life. We moved into my living room, and I watched as Stella's eyes cataloged everything. The outdated furniture, the family photos, the modest decorations I'd collected over the years. I could practically see her calculating the value of my possessions, probably wondering where all that lottery money was going to be spent. "Can I get anyone something to drink?" I offered. "I made fresh lemonade, and I have chocolate chip cookies, Joshua's favorite recipe." "Cookies!" Anthony suddenly perked up, wiggling in Joshua's arms. "Anthony loves cookies," Stella said quickly. "Don't you, baby? But just one, okay? We don't want to spoil your dinner." I brought out the blue tin, the same one I'd packed Joshua's school lunches in, and watched as Anthony's eyes widened at the sight of the cookies inside. "Go ahead, sweetheart," I encouraged him. He reached for one with his small hands, took a tiny bite, and his whole face lit up. "Good," he announced, crumbs falling onto his pristine shirt. "What do you say, Anthony?" Stella prompted. "Thank you, Grandma," he said obediently, and my heart nearly burst. For the next hour, I watched my son and his wife perform the most elaborate charade I'd ever witnessed. They praised my house, complimented my decorating, and made small talk about the weather and the neighborhood. Stella gushed about how much Anthony had been looking forward to this visit, while Joshua nodded along and added comments about how sorry they were it had taken so long to arrange. But their eyes kept wandering. Stella asked pointed questions about my investment plans and whether I was thinking about upgrading my living situation. Joshua mentioned how expensive childcare had become, how they were thinking about buying a bigger house, how Anthony would need a college fund soon. They weren't being subtle. They were like actors who'd forgotten their lines and were improvising badly. The most telling moment came when Anthony spilled juice on his shirt. Without thinking, I reached for him with a napkin, the way any grandmother would instinctively help her grandchild. "Don't," Stella said sharply, then caught herself and softened her tone. "I mean, I've got it. Thanks, though." She snatched Anthony away from me so quickly that he started to whimper. In that instant, I saw the truth of the past 3 years. Anthony hadn't been kept from me because they needed space or time to bond. He'd been kept from me because Stella viewed me as a threat to her control, and Joshua had let it happen. When they finally left, promising to definitely do this again soon, I stood in my doorway watching them drive away. Anthony was crying in his car seat, probably tired and overstimulated, and I could see Stella gesturing animatedly to Joshua as they pulled out of my driveway. I knew what they were discussing. They were making plans for my money. Inside my house, I picked up the phone and dialed my financial advisor. "Margaret, it's Joyce and Klein. I need to move forward with those charitable donations we discussed. All of them. I want everything transferred by Monday morning." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet living room, looking at the blue tin with 2 remaining cookies. Anthony had eaten 3 of them, getting chocolate smears on his little fingers, giggling when I made funny faces at him. For one brief, beautiful hour, I'd been a grandmother. It was going to have to be enough. The phone calls started Monday morning. Mom, it's Joshua. I just wanted to thank you again for Saturday. Anthony hasn't stopped talking about his grandma and those amazing cookies. I smiled despite myself. He's such a sweet boy, Joshua. He has your eyes. He really does, doesn't he? Listen, Mom. Stella and I were talking, and we'd love to have you over for dinner this week. Maybe Thursday? Anthony keeps asking when he can see Grandma again. The lie came so easily to him. Anthony was 3 years old. If he was asking about me after one visit, why had they kept him away for 3 years? That sounds lovely, I said. Should I bring anything? Oh, just yourself. And Mom? We've been thinking about Anthony's future, you know. College is so expensive these days, and we want to make sure he has every opportunity. Maybe we could talk about that when you come over. There it was. The real reason for the invitation. Tuesday brought another call, this time from Stella. Joyce Ann, hi. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to tell you how much Saturday meant to all of us. Joshua has been so happy since reconnecting with you. Reconnecting. As if our 3-year separation had been mutual. It meant everything to me too, Stella. I'm so glad. You know, I've been feeling terrible about how distant we've been. I think I was just overwhelmed with being a new mom, and maybe I was a little protective, but seeing you with Anthony, you're such a natural grandmother. The words should have made me happy, but they felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. Anthony is lucky to have such devoted parents, I said carefully. We try our best. Speaking of which, Joshua and I have been talking about expanding our family, maybe giving Anthony a little brother or sister. Of course, with daycare costs and everything, it's a big financial decision. By Wednesday, the pattern was clear. Every conversation somehow circled back to money, expenses, Anthony's future needs. They were building a case, laying groundwork for what they assumed would be my generous financial support. But Wednesday evening brought something unexpected. I was at the grocery store, picking up ingredients for the dinner I planned to cook at their house, when I heard familiar voices from the next aisle over. I peered around the corner and saw Stella with another woman I didn't recognize, both of them pushing shopping carts. Can't believe how perfectly it worked out, Stella was saying. The timing was just incredible. What do you mean? The other woman asked. Joshua's mom winning the lottery right when we needed it most. I mean, what are the odds? It's like the universe knew we were about to lose the house. My blood went cold. Lose the house? Are things really that bad? Her friend asked. Worse than bad. Joshua's been out of work for 6 months and we're 3 payments behind on the mortgage. I've been selling everything I can on Facebook, but it's not enough. We were literally about to file for bankruptcy when that lottery announcement hit the news. I gripped my shopping cart handle, my knuckles white. So you think she'll help? Stella laughed, a sound I'd never heard from her before, cold and calculating. Are you kidding? She's been desperate to be part of Anthony's life for years. All we had to do was dangle that carrot, and she practically begged us to let her back in. That's kind of manipulative, don't you think? It's survival. Besides, what's she going to do with all that money anyway? She's 70 years old, living alone in that tiny house. At least this way, it goes toward family, toward her grandson's future. The other woman made a non-committal sound. What if she doesn't give you as much as you need? Then we'll have to be more creative. Joshua found her financial advisor's number in her phone book when we were there Saturday. Margaret something. We could always contact her directly, explain the family emergency, or maybe suggest that Anthony needs to move in with Grandma for a while if we lose the house. You know, really pull at her heartstrings. They moved toward the checkout, their voices fading, but I heard enough. The old lady will never see it coming. She's been so lonely and desperate for family. She'll do anything to keep us around. I stood frozen in the canned goods aisle, surrounded by the mundane items of ordinary life, feeling like my world had just collapsed again. They weren't just after my money. They were planning to manipulate me emotionally, to use my love for Anthony as leverage, and if I didn't cooperate, they'd threaten to take him away from me again. Worst of all, Joshua knew. He had to know about their financial situation, about their plan to manipulate me. The son I'd raised, who I'd loved unconditionally for 31 years, was actively participating in this scheme. I abandoned my shopping cart and walked out of the store in a daze. At home, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. Part of me wanted to call them, to confront them about what I'd heard, but a larger part of me wanted to see how far they'd go. I called Margaret instead. "Has anyone contacted you about my lottery winnings?" I asked. "Actually, yes. A young man called this morning claiming to be your son. He said there was a family emergency and asked about accessing funds quickly. I told him I couldn't discuss your finances with anyone without written authorization from you." "What kind of emergency did he mention?" "Something about medical bills and potential foreclosure. He seemed quite desperate. I assumed you'd authorized him to call." "Medical bills. They'd upgraded their story. Margaret, I need you to add a security password to my account. Don't discuss anything with anyone, even if they claim to be family, unless they have that password." After I hung up, I walked through my house looking at everything differently. They'd been here Saturday, taking inventory. Stella had asked about my investment plans and whether I was thinking about upgrading my living situation. Now I understood why. They weren't just planning to ask for money. They were planning to take everything. I picked up Anthony's photo from the mantel, the one Mrs. Patterson had printed for me 3 years ago. He was so tiny in that picture, just days old, completely innocent of the adults who would use him as a weapon. That little boy deserved better than parents who would manipulate his grandmother's love for their own gain. He deserved better than a father who would participate in such cruelty. And I deserved better than being treated like a foolish old woman who could be easily manipulated. Thursday's dinner was still happening, but not the way they expected. Thursday evening, I arrived at Joshua and Stella's house with a homemade lasagna and a carefully rehearsed smile. Their neighborhood was nicer than I'd expected. Large houses with manicured lawns that spoke of money and status. But now I knew the truth behind the facade. "Mom!" Joshua greeted me with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. Come in, come in. Anthony's been asking about you all day." The house was beautiful but felt cold, like a showroom rather than a home. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the matching throw pillows to the strategically placed family photos. I noticed several boxes stacked in corners, probably items Stella had mentioned selling. Anthony ran to me the moment he saw me, wrapping his little arms around my legs. "Grandma, did you bring cookies?" "Anthony, what do we say?" Stella chided, but she was smiling. The performance had begun. "Please, can I have cookies, Grandma?" "After dinner, sweetheart," I promised, ruffling his hair. "But I did bring something special for you." I pulled out a small wrapped gift, a children's book about grandmothers. Anthony tore into the wrapping with the enthusiasm only a 3-year-old could muster. "What do you say to Grandma?" Joshua prompted. "Thank you." Anthony hugged the book to his chest, then looked up at me with Joshua's dark eyes. "Will you read it to me?" "Of course, baby. Maybe after dinner." Stella appeared at my elbow. "Joyce-Ann, you're just so generous. Anthony is so lucky to have such a thoughtful grandmother." The word lucky hung in the air between us. Lucky to have a grandmother they'd kept hidden for 3 years until they needed money. Dinner was an elaborate production. Stella had clearly spent considerable effort preparing everything perfectly, despite their supposed financial crisis. The table was set with china I was sure they couldn't afford, and the wine Joshua poured was expensive. "This is all so lovely," I commented, looking around. "You two have such beautiful taste." "Thank you," Stella beamed. "Though, to be honest, we've been thinking about downsizing. This house is really more than we need, and the expenses—" "Here we go," I thought. "Houses can be such a burden," I agreed. "All those repairs, property taxes, insurance." Joshua jumped in. "Exactly. And with Anthony getting older, we need to think about his future. College costs, you know? We want to make sure he has every opportunity." "Of course. Family is the most important thing." They exchanged a quick glance, and I could practically see them congratulating themselves on how well this was going. After dinner, while Anthony played with his new book in the living room, Stella served coffee, and Joshua cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, there's something we need to discuss with you." I set down my coffee cup and gave him my full attention. "What is it, honey?" "Well, you know how happy we are that you're back in our lives. Anthony adores you already, and Stella and we realize how wrong we were to keep you away. We were just so overwhelmed," Stella added. "New parents, you know. But we see now how much we missed out on, how much Anthony missed out on. I appreciate that," I said carefully. Joshua took a deep breath. "The thing is, Mom, we're in a bit of financial trouble. I lost my job 6 months ago, and we're behind on the mortgage. We're trying to work it out with the bank, but we hate to ask," Stella interjected. "But with your lottery win, we were hoping maybe you could help us, just until Joshua finds new work." I looked at both of them. These two people who had stolen 3 years of my grandson's life and were now trying to steal my financial security as well. "How much do you need?" I asked. They exchanged another glance. "Well, to catch up on the mortgage and get back on our feet? Maybe 200,000? I know it sounds like a lot, but it would really just be a loan. We'd pay you back once things turn around." $200,000. Nearly a third of my lottery winnings. "That is a lot," I agreed. "Let me think about it." "Of course," Joshua said quickly. "Take all the time you need." "But Mom, if we lose the house, we might have to move far away. For my job prospects, you understand. And that would mean Anthony would be far from his grandmother," Stella finished, "which would just break his little heart." There it was. The threat, delivered with perfect parental concern. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead, I stepped outside onto their back patio and pulled out my phone. I called Margaret. "Is everything in place?" I asked quietly. "All transfers completed this morning. The documentation should reach the various charities by end of business tomorrow. Thank you, Margaret. You've been wonderful." When I returned to the living room, Anthony was curled up on the couch with his book fighting sleep. I sat beside him and gathered him into my arms, breathing in his little boy scent of shampoo and innocence. "Grandma," he murmured sleepily, "will you come see me again?" My heart broke a little. "I love you so much, Anthony. Don't ever forget that." Joshua and Stella were watching us with satisfied smiles, probably calculating how much my obvious attachment to Anthony was worth. I stood up, gently settling Anthony on the couch, and turned to face them. "I've made my decision about the money," I announced. They both leaned forward eagerly. "I'm not giving you any of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Stella's smile froze on her face, while Joshua blinked as if he hadn't heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" Stella asked. "I said no, I'm not giving you any money." Joshua's face went pale. "Mom, I don't understand. We're family. Anthony is your grandson." "Yes, he is, and for 3 years you kept him from me. Not because you needed space, not because you were overwhelmed new parents, but because Stella decided I wasn't worthy of being his grandmother." "That's not true," Stella protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Then explain why you called me within hours of the lottery announcement. Explain why every conversation this week has somehow involved money or expenses, or Anthony's future costs." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, showing them the screen. "You see this? 0 balance. Every penny of that lottery money has been donated to children's charities. All of it." "Gone?" Stella gasped. Joshua's face went from pale to gray. "You're lying," Stella whispered. "Call Margaret Stewart at First National Bank if you don't believe me. Though she won't discuss my finances with you, I made sure of that after Joshua tried to contact her behind my back." Joshua slumped into a chair. "Mom, what have you done? We needed that money. We're going to lose everything." "No, Joshua. You lost everything 3 years ago when you chose to exclude me from Anthony's life. This money was never yours. My love for my grandson was never something you could buy and sell." Stella's mask finally slipped completely. "You selfish old woman. What kind of grandmother punishes her own grandchild out of spite?" "The kind who refuses to be manipulated and used," I replied calmly. "Anthony deserves better than parents who would use him as leverage. He deserves better than a father who would participate in manipulating his own mother." I looked at Anthony, still sleeping peacefully on the couch, unaware that his world was about to change again. "I'm leaving now," I announced, "and this time, it's my choice." I walked to the front door, but Joshua's voice stopped me. Mom, please, don't do this. We can work this out. I turned back one last time. Joshua, you had 31 years of my unconditional love, and you threw it away for someone who sees family as a source of income. I hope it was worth it. As I drove away from their house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Peace. The next morning, I called my travel agent and booked a cruise to Alaska, something I'd always wanted to do. I enrolled in pottery classes at the community center. I adopted a senior cat from the local shelter, a orange tabby named Marmalade, who had also been abandoned and was looking for a quiet home to spend his golden years. I knew Joshua and Stella would try to contact me again, probably with promises and apologies and threats, but I'd changed my phone number and given it only to people who truly cared about me. 3 months later, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with news that Joshua and Stella had indeed lost their house and moved across the country. She didn't know where, and I didn't ask. I kept one photo of Anthony on my mantle, the one from our single afternoon together, where he's smiling with chocolate chip cookie crumbs on his face. Sometimes I wondered about him, hoped he was happy wherever he was, but mostly, I focused on the life I was building for myself. A life where love wasn't conditional, where family wasn't transactional, and where a 70-year-old woman could finally learn that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. I was free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.